Good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're tuning from. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the evaluation of energy programs and policies. This is the 36th episode of the webinar series about strengthening the evaluation in the Asia-Pacific region, organized and brought to you by the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and Asia-Pacific Evaluation Association with their partners. My name is Sakya Mode, and I'm from the Fiji Islands. Next slide, Radhika, please. My name is Sakya Mode, and I'm from the Fiji Islands, co-leader of EvalYouth Pacific and co-founder and trustee of Pacific Resilient Future. It is my privilege and honor to be your host and moderator for these sessions. Welcome once again. Next slide, please. Before we begin, with just a few housekeeping rules for all of us, just to make sure we're helping you the best as we can. Please kindly keep your microphone and video disabled to lessen the load on your internet bandwidth and preserve event quality. And questions and concerns, we leave them right at the end. So please do type your questions or some of the things that comments or some of the things that you're struggling with in terms of evaluation of energy program policies. And we will bring them up right at the end during Q&A sessions. Next slide, please. So ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, once again, thank you for joining us in today's session. I'm sure you learned a lot of things, and this session will increase your level of knowledge and understanding of the evaluation of energy program and policies. And we have a guest speaker who is an expert and someone who's very knowledgeable in this area. But before that, I'd like to introduce you to Anindita Sharma, who will be delivering an opening remarks for us. Ms. Anindita Sharma is the partner and regional director of ROI Institute Asia Pacific. She's also the global moderator of Harvard Business Publishing. Please welcome Ms. Sharma on stage. Ms. Sharma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sakyo. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. Welcome to this session. I'd like to begin first by thanking everyone for being here, starting with Dr. Ed Vine. Thank you, Dr. Vine, for your time today. Thank you also, Sakyo and Chamathkara, for participating in the discussions. Also, our organizers today are Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, the EvalYouth Sri Lanka, EvalYouth Pacific, Center for Evaluation at the University of Jayewardenepura, and the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association. Most of all, and very specifically, I would like to call out the organizing committee, which has put this event together, and that is Asela, Randika, Madhuka, Hasiti, Pramoda, and Punya. Thank you. Now the context. Just a few days ago, the United Nations Environment Program issued a report with the dire warning that our hopes to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade is no longer on a credible pathway. Now, as a result, and maybe more so, there is a renewed commitment, a lot of pledges to all the things that need to happen to correct and make all of our futures better. A lot of it predicated upon energy policies and programs, which is what brings us to the importance of our discussion today with Ed. Our question then is, what does the implementation of these programs foretell for people like us, practitioners and evaluators, and what can we do about this? I'd welcome all of you to join us in this discussion with Dr. Ed Vine and ask these very questions. Thank you. Back to you, Sakyo.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anindita Sharma, for your leadership and for setting the stage with that great opening remarks linking evaluation of energy programs and policies to the reality, which is climate change, and how important it is for us to be learning these things. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the main part and the main moment we are all waiting for. Please join me and welcome Dr. Edward Vine, Dr. Edward Pine, as I've mentioned before, is an incredible expert on this subject matter. He is affiliated Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, steering committee member of the Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. Dr. Vine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it clearly. Thank you.
Oh, yes, still see it?
We do see it. Please go ahead.
Very good. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar series. And in this particular webinar, I've been following SLEvA and APA for years now, and it's really great to be part of it tonight. Tonight for me, maybe morning for you or in the afternoon. And this focuses on my work for the last 40 years, really, on evaluation and energy programs and policies. And there's a lot to cover. And I hope that the slides will be available later, because I'll go through this quickly, but I'm trying to discuss certain topics quickly, but that should resonate with different audiences, because I'm sure you have a lot of different people participating on the webinar. So first, I want to go over the context for this talk, and then talk about evaluation briefly, setting the stage for that. What do we mean by evaluation of energy programs and policies? And then briefly look at evaluation going on in Asia Pacific region. And then what have we learned from evaluation over the years? What are the lessons learned? How can we strengthen the value of evaluation, the whole exercise of evaluation? And then the last one looks at evaluator competencies. I'm sure there are a number of young evaluators, and there are other people thinking about evaluation, wondering, well, what does it take to be an evaluator? What do I need to do or learn? And so hopefully you'll appreciate that as well. That's coming from the American Evaluation Association. So setting the context, as we heard earlier, climate change impacts are really critical, and it's not something we have to wait for 20, 30 years. They're here. They're occurring. In this past year, we've seen flash floods, drought, dust storms, heat waves. The UN Secretary General recently said we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. And then later, climate change is the central challenge of our century. So we really need to address that. I've worked in the climate change era for decades, and it's a driving force for what we do in evaluation. And there's a recent report that came out on reducing emissions in the United States by my colleagues at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE. And they have put out this sort of scenario that they can reduce emissions by half if they follow promoting and implementing and evaluating efficiency in these sectors: appliances, zero energy buildings, building improvement, industrial efficiency, vehicle efficiency, electric distribution savings. And here's some more examples. I won't go in depth in any of these, but you can see there are a variety of areas that we can pursue to improve energy efficiency. If we do, we can really reduce our emissions. Now, how do we do that? How do we evaluate these energy programs and policies? So for me, what is evaluation? It's an objective process of understanding how a policy or program was implemented, what effects it had, for whom and why, And it leads to more effective policies and programs. So it has a lot of meaning and impact if done properly. So why do we evaluate? We want to reduce uncertainty. We want to have good decisions being made at all levels in the private and public sector. We need to provide the information to make these good decisions regarding policies and investments. We need to assess the impacts. Often we want to know how much has energy changed, for example, by implementing a certain program, as well as other targets due to the programs and policies. And then for me, what's really important is what we've learned from this evaluation so that we can go on and improve program and policy design. And that will affect policies, budgets, planners, policymakers, as well as customers. So that's why it's a very critical and important exercise. And there are many different stakeholders. It's just not one type of group of people who really want to benefit from this. There are program implementers and administrators, funders of these programs, regulators in certain cases, planners and forecasts to see, making sure they will have enough energy to supply the demand, meet the demand, elected and appointed officials, special interest groups in the United States, for example. Those groups are really, environmental groups have been very active in this. And then customers and ratepayers, as I mentioned. Ratepayers pay the utility, and some of that utility funding goes into some of these energy efficiency programs. So briefly, we have three types of evaluations. We have impact evaluation, and that the impacts usually have focus on energy, whether it be electricity, natural gas, could be kerosene, firewood, and so on. And the time period, we often do it yearly and on an annual basis, but sometimes it's important seasonally, summer versus winter as an example. And often now people are more interested on weekly, daily, and even hourly. If you're interested in peak demand, and peak demand occurs for certain hours in a year, you want to see how energy efficiency programs affect those hourly impacts. And then there's increasing interest in multiple, what we call multiple impact or non-energy impacts, NEIs. And that focuses on employment, indoor and outdoor air quality, health, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. And finally, in this, we look at usually both changes in what we call gross energy savings and demand savings, or net energy and demand savings. The net is, you see a change in savings, but is that really attributable to the program? Or would customers, say in the industrial facility, saw the positive merits of energy efficiency, was going to do it itself independent of the program, and they would have been called a free rider. We're also interested in spillover, because some programs or projects that occur do affect neighbors, for example, and they say, oh, Ed just put insulation in his roof, maybe we should too, those kinds of things. So those are the impact side. The process side is just as important, especially for me. We really want to know why a program succeeds or fails to deliver savings. What are the barriers? Were there any unanticipated behavioral responses? What works well and doesn't? And that's often based on, we have a certain model in mind, what we call a theory and logic model that says, okay, if we put money into this program, this is how it's supposed to operate. This is how it's supposed to influence people or owners of buildings to invest in energy efficiency. And we need to know whether that works or not, or whether that model needs to be changed. We need maybe put in more money, or sometimes less money, or more education, etc. And then we need to assess the reasons for success, because out of the evaluation comes recommendations to improve program effectiveness, efficiency, and operational management. Market transformation is the third type of evaluation. And market transformation refers to how is the market changing over time. In our case, is it becoming more energy efficient? So when you go to your local hardware store, for example, and you need to buy an appliance, is that you're going to hope everything's efficient rather than show me what is efficient versus what's not efficient. And there's market theory and program theory on how markets operate and are impacted by the programs, and we need to look at that, as well as sustainability. We're all about sustainability in this exercise. We hope these markets are changed forever. They don't go, when the programs go away, the markets don't go back to what they were before the programs. So those are the three types of evaluations that's pursued for looking at energy. And then finally, closing the loop is something I've written on and talked about over the years. We want to make sure the evaluation results are useful and used by program stakeholders. It doesn't make sense to do a great evaluation, and in the old days, we put it in a filing cabinet. Now you put it up in the cloud. But we really need to work with stakeholders so they understand what the evaluation says and what the recommendations are, and whether they follow the recommendations or dismiss them. And we need to know why they do one or the other. So let's briefly talk about evaluation in the Asia-Pacific region. Why is evaluation important in Asia-Pacific? Economies are developing and implementing new energy policies and programs, even before climate change, but particularly when they're trying to address climate change, they're developing programs, they understand energy is critical in this. And evaluation can be a very important part of the process. It can also increase the expertise in governments and private sector for data gathering and analysis. It can access the private sector energy investments towards policy goals. If there's one thing for taking away, it is that the public sector cannot do this alone, and the private sector cannot do this alone for getting to our energy efficiency goals. It really is the nexus where both the public and private sectors work together. They can both benefit and they can help fund a lot of the activities. We also, evaluation is increasing the knowledge, as I said, on the effects of energy policies and programs, and improve program design and implementation. However, evaluation has been limited so far in Asia Pacific. Government initiatives do not include evaluation often. Action plans or policy focuses mainly on implementation of policies and programs. People would rather put all their money into implementation rather than even putting a little money in evaluation. The funding of data collection evaluation often is not available or a very low priority. And evaluation expertise is limited. In some cases, you have to have international consultants come in and do the evaluation. Hopefully over time, as I'll mention later, we want to build that expertise in each of these countries in the Asia Pacific region so they don't have to really rely on international evaluators. They have their own expertise. Evaluation data are lacking or not standardized, so it's hard to compare an evaluation of a program, say in Sri Lanka with one in Vietnam, if they're not using a similar set of data. Evaluations often conducted in an ad hoc manner. Someone will say, yeah, we should do an evaluation without really thinking, as I mentioned about those logic models and program theory models. And, excuse me. And then evaluation is conducted without clear methodology and standards. There are great methodologies out there and standards in different countries. Whether they're being used is a whole different question. I've been fortunate to be working in the Asia Pacific region for a number of years and have held workshops, and as you can see in the different regions here. And recently for APEC, I held these workshops in 2017 in Thailand in person and then online because of COVID in 2021. And we've prepared 2 white papers on evaluation. As part of that, there were 2 surveys, 2017, 2020. And I just want to talk to you briefly about the 2020 survey and then compare to the older survey. So it was sent to experts in APEC member economies, expert groups, different expert groups APEC has, 26 surveys, so not a lot, but were completed from 15 economies. And I'm not sure, you should be able to see this since everyone's using a screen. You can look on the left side are the economies, whether evaluation was required or not, and then what was evaluation related to? Have they developed evaluation policies to industry, appliances, building codes, transport, and renewable? So the main areas of evaluation activity that we found were policies and programs related to energy efficient lighting, electrical, appliances, energy efficiency in industry, and renewable energy. Compared to the older survey, we found that where 7 economies reported in both the surveys, 2017 and 2020, China, Indonesia, and Thailand now require evaluation to cover more policy areas. New Zealand, for whatever reason, required fewer policy areas. Chile, Indonesia, and Malaysia had more private sector involvement in evaluation, which is good. And New Zealand, again, had less private sector involvement, and there was no change in the other economies. Respondents from more economies did recognize the barriers to women's participation in evaluation, and that's important. When I first started in evaluation, gender was not an issue, and even equity was not a big issue. Definitely on the gender side, we see more women participating in the evaluation exercise, and even more importantly, evaluation looking at the impacts of programs on women in, for example, households. More economies then were evaluating the impact of energy policies on women, and the evaluation of renewable energy programs was not asked in the first survey, but 5 of the 12 economies now were conducting evaluation in the field. And I'm sure many of you know that renewable energy, particularly wind and solar, have really increased over time in terms of providing energy to each of these countries. We also had a conference last year in Jakarta, and we had speakers from these countries talk about evaluation, and that's available on a recording on the Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific website, and I'll give you the website later. But I just wanted to highlight 3 of the countries: Indonesia, Nepal, and New Zealand. New Zealand's government has an evaluation strategy that requires M&E plans for all programs. There's a process for prioritizing evaluation projects. There's a process for feeding the learnings, as I said, closing the loop back into program design. And they often celebrate the success of the program after an evaluation's been completed. So the evaluation focuses on 3 questions. Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing it the right way? And are we making a difference? Very great questions to ask. Now in Nepal, the government emphasizes evaluation and energy. And in fact, in the Constitution of Nepal, evaluation is incorporated in that. There's a measurement or monitoring and an evaluation management bill. Energy sector has M&E, and there's a good M&E framework in the energy sector in place since 2014. But I have to say, or at least the speaker was saying, not me, that the emphasis was really on monitoring rather than evaluation. And as I'll say later, there is a difference. And the earlier evaluations were limited to cost-benefit analysis and strictly on the energy savings. And there's more to a cost-benefit analysis, as I alluded to earlier, looking at multiple impacts. Multi-criteria analysis just starting in Nepal and incorporating that. And as I mentioned, before and after evaluation still is very rare. And that's key in really looking at the credibility of the results of an evaluation. And then finally, this is in Indonesia. Indonesia has been very active due to one of my colleagues, John Raspati, who they have formed their own group. We have, as I'll talk later, a energy evaluation Asia Pacific region, organization, and he felt we could help them, but he wanted his own group in Indonesia. And it's called Energy Evaluation Indonesia, EEI. And their key is trying to work with different users of evaluation, whether it's government, funding agencies, the parliament, and then also special interest groups outside of that, NGOs, community, and work to increase the value of the evaluation so that it is done on a more regular basis. So coming to strengthening the value of evaluation. And I know there are people who've been on this call who've been working in evaluation. I hope that what I talk about in this section will resonate with them and they understand what I'm addressing. There are three types of improvements that we've learned over the years on evaluation. One is institutional, second methodological, and third is on capacity building. And in general, the purpose of institutional is really to increase the visibility and legitimacy of evaluation. So people will actively seek evaluation and the results. They'll say, has this program been evaluated? Do we know if it works or not? How can we improve it? And it will be hard to ignore by not just the implementers, by administrators and policymakers in the list I mentioned to you earlier. And then again, make sure the results of evaluation studies have a practical, useful effect on the programs and policies that are studied, as well as on the organizations that are affected and on the big picture, like climate change. Do these programs lead, for example, to a reduction in carbon emissions? Now, there are specific actions people can take at the institution, addressing these institutional issues. First, it's mainly very important for evaluators are sitting at the table with implementers when they're planning their evaluations. Program budgets, policy, when they're addressing the programs. What are the program budgets? What are the policy interventions? What are design and implementation? What is the logic of the program? What do they expect to do with all the money coming into the program? And will program be able to be evaluated or not? And if not, why not? At the same time, we need to make sure program implementers are sitting at the table with evaluators when the evaluators are planning their study design, their program logic, what metrics they're going to use for evaluating a program. And very importantly, what will be the impact on the organizational mission and operations of the people that are being affected? For example, if there's an industrial facility and they're being asked to participate in a program, they'll want to know, how does this affect my profit line, for example? Will I have to shut down operations while energy efficiency measures are installed? Will it improve my productivity? And we really need to understand their concerns. Second group of actions, again, ensure evaluation findings are timely, useful, and used by regulators, program designers, etc. Encourage rapid evaluation if you can before the new programs are designed. So unfortunately, in the way evaluations are conducted, they're often conducted 1 or maybe 2 years later after a program's been implemented. You need to get the data, right? And the data won't be available until the program is really being implemented. But sometimes you can go early into a program for certain processes to make sure they are being implemented the way they were designed to be. So it'd be great to have some meaningful budgets for doing this rapid evaluation, particularly for the process side, so you can make mid-course redesign if needed. And then what we've learned, particularly in the more recent years, is to ensure evaluation teams are to be more multidisciplinary, diverse, and inclusive, including women and minorities. One person can't do evaluation. In the old days, one person was doing an evaluation, whether it's impact or process, et cetera. But I think everyone here appreciates having different points of view in the room when designing an evaluation and conducting an evaluation of a program, that you need people from different backgrounds, and it should be diverse and inclusive. No, I talked earlier about process and impact evaluations. Often they're done discreetly. There's one team doing process, one team doing impact, which is fine, but they should really try to be integrated and work together. What we're aiming for to learn from a program is what we call holistic evaluation. And then we need to emphasize evaluation as an essential and positive tool for implementers. As I mentioned before, implementers don't want to start criticizing you, saying, oh, I have to be evaluated again, sort of a very negative exercise. The evaluator needs to emphasize there are positive things that can come out of an evaluation. Evaluators can identify market opportunities. They can help forecast for technology adoption. And also they can identify barriers and improvements to program theory and logic models that will help their own operations. So it's beneficial for them as well as other stakeholders. So the second group is methodological. We've really focused strictly on just energy savings, kilowatts saved, therms saved, barrels of oil saved. But we really need to address all impacts. I mentioned earlier the non-energy impacts, and particularly in the last 5 years, there's, as you can imagine, there's more interest in greenhouse gas emissions. So you can say, oh yeah, we saved 1,000 kilowatt hours, but what does that mean in terms of addressing climate change? Have we saved anything in reducing carbon emissions, for example? Sustainable development, I give talks on this as well, are very critical. We need to incorporate that in our evaluations, seeing how the different goals are addressed, because they're all these linkages with the energy sector. Energy is one of the goals in terms of sustainable development goals. We look at sustainability, energy sufficiency, resilience, it all interplays with one another. And then particularly and I've given talk on this on COVID, what has been the impacts on unserved, underserved, and disadvantaged communities, gender, ethnicity, income. People really didn't look at this, but I think if there's one good thing that comes out of this COVID last 3 years, is that certain communities get hit harder than others. I'll leave it at that. And then, as I mentioned, market transformation and market changes are critical, and demand savings. For a particular hour, is this program going to affect demand? So maybe we don't have to build another power plant, for example, to meet that peak, if we can reduce the peak for 1 or 2 hours. We need to systematically determine how evaluation can collect and use credible data for new smart technologies. I'm sure you've heard about smart appliances, the smart home, smart commercial buildings, and evaluation, that collection of data is important, using monitoring and verification and that real-time monitoring data. But remember, M&V is not the same as EM&V, the evaluation exercise, as I mentioned earlier, and what's involved in that. Finally, in this topic, capacity building, we need to strengthen the value of evaluation through capacity building with these stakeholders. I'm not going to have time to really go over this in detail, but there's a model that I've been using. I didn't create this, somebody else did, but it basically on the left side, you're developing evaluation knowledge, skills, and attitudes of key individuals through training, workshops, etc. And then that's not sufficient. You want to affect more people, and you want to transfer that learning to the practice of sustainable evaluation through strategic plans, evaluation policies and procedures, etc. And then from that, you want leaders, whether it's in government, private sector, to really support evaluation and develop the culture of evaluation, and that gets diffused within the whole country. That's the idea, that's the vision. And there are roles for different actors like APEA, SLEvA, and EEAP. Now, what is EEAP? I've mentioned that before. Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. It's a nonprofit established in 2018, modeled after the one in the US since 1983 and in Europe since 2010. It's taking a leadership role in expanding the practice of and capacity for objective evaluation. in the energy efficiency, renewable energy program and policy arena. It's using workshops, conferences, webinars, and other web-based tools to foster the development of the self-sustaining evaluation communities. And it's led by a steering committee and an advisory committee. And I encourage you all to go to this website, become a member. It's free. You'll just get news about what's going on in Asia Pacific and energy evaluation. We've had these webinars this year, focusing on evaluation of energy programs in these countries. And as I said, the recordings are available on our website. Finally, I have a few minutes left. I just want to talk about evaluator competencies. So the American Evaluation Association, AEA, developed these competencies over a 3-year period. They aren't supposed to exclude qualified people, and it's a way to address systematic challenges to the field's professionalization. And it's a credentialing or assessment. It's not a credentialing or assessment system, and it's not perfect and set in stone. It's a work in progress, but I think it's a really good first start. They provide common language and criteria for defining evaluation practice. It's a way to make clear the defining characteristics of evaluation and provides multiple pathways for entry. It looks at these 5 different topical areas: the professional practice, methodology, context, planning and management, and interpersonal. I'm really quickly going through this because I am running out of time. And I want to highlight just a few of the areas in each of the domains. For example, for the professional practice, the competent evaluator needs to select the evaluation approaches and theories appropriately. It needs to use, the evaluator uses systematic evidence to make evaluative judgments. It's not just a judgment exercise. And then the competent evaluator advocates for the field of evaluation and its value. In terms of the second domain on methodology, the competent evaluator determines and justifies the appropriate methods to answer evaluation questions, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or mixed. It involves stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, in designing, implementing, interpreting, and reporting evaluations as appropriate, and identifies the strengths and limitations of evaluation design and methods. In terms of context, the competent evaluator engages a diverse range of users and stakeholders through the whole process, not just one group, but really have an interdisciplinary type of exercise. The competent evaluator communicates evaluation processes and results in a timely, appropriate, and effective ways. And the competent evaluator promotes evaluation use and influence in context, understanding where the evaluation is being done, what are the feelings for evaluation, and how it can be used. The fourth domain is on planning and management, and the competent evaluator addresses aspects of culture and planning and managing evaluation. Each country, for example, has a different culture usually, and how planning and evaluation is used is going to vary. So whoever's doing the evaluation needs to understand that environment. The competent evaluator teams with others when appropriate and works with stakeholders to build the evaluation capacity when appropriate. And finally, the last domain is interpersonal. So the competent evaluator fosters positive relationships for professional practice and evaluation use, builds trust through the evaluation. If nobody trusts the evaluator, nobody's going to listen to the evaluation. And then the competent evaluator communicates in meaningful ways that enhances the effectiveness of the evaluation. Again, evaluations need to be effective and they need to be used, and the stakeholders need to understand in a meaningful way what was learned in the evaluation, how it affects them, and how they can use it. If they don't get that, if somebody just files a report, it won't be used. And on that note, I'm just giving you my email address if somebody has questions after the webinar, but I think now we do have time for questions. I know time was built in for that. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the organizers.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Edward Vine, for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. It's amazing and nicely done, rich with information of the concepts, components, and guidance, and some real-life world case scenarios, examples of evaluations of energy programs and policies. Thank you so much. It looks like we have some questions in the chat box, and people have been asking questions when you're presenting. First question is from Carlos Javier. There's a few questions from Carlos Javier from Pakistan. Carlos is asking, considering the 3 types of evaluation described, how are ethical consideration embedded or included?
Well, you know, there are probably lots. I'm not sure what Carlos had in mind, because you can expect a variety of ethical questions, but one of the most important ethical questions is the independence and objectivity of the evaluator. So for example, if a utility has an energy efficiency program and they hire an evaluator, is the evaluator beholden to the utility? So they will sort of come up with a good evaluation that reflects well on the utility. And this has been an ongoing issue. And what has happened is that, particularly in the United States, but in other places where an evaluation is required, it gets done by somebody who has no ties to the implementer. So that is very critical. Sometimes utility has tried, as if they are implementer, to have a separate unit, and they said, oh, the evaluation unit's over here, the implementation is over here, and we don't talk to one another, we're not affected. That may work, I'm not saying it won't, but we find that, to be clear, particularly from a public perspective, it's much easier if, for example, a regulator hires an evaluator to evaluate the utility program, then there are really no ethical questions there. So that's one example.
Thank you for that, Dr. Edward Vine. Carlos, I hope that answer your questions, but if you have follow-up questions, you're most welcome to email and message Dr. Edward Vine directly. And I'm sure you also have other questions. Would you mind unmute and ask your questions directly? And kindly requesting everyone, if you have any questions, please drop them on the chat box, or you can also raise your hand using the raise hand button, and I'll give you a chance to ask your questions to Dr. Edward Vine. Carlos?
Well, I did look at the chat box, and quickly, Carlos had a series of questions. He shouldn't monopolize, but I do like the last question about how do you increase parliamentary and civil social demand of energy program evaluation. And again, you know, most of my experiences in the United States, and what I recognize is the nonprofits have a very critical role. And as I mentioned, environmental program organizations have been active at the regulatory world. So if there's a workshop or a public hearing, they're active and they ask about evaluation, the different parts of evaluation. So if you have nonprofits in your country, I would work with them so they can push the agenda for evaluation, because often it comes from outside to push for this. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Edward Vine. Is there any other questions from our participants? We still have some more time, a few minutes left before we wrap up. One more questions from the audience. Okay, we have a Menbaya Bude. Please unmute, and the floor is yours. You can ask Dr. Edward Vine right away, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me to ask, and thank you for a great presentation. And I'm just the first time involving in this session from the Mongolia. And I'm working in the energy program as a M&E specialist. And I have a question, something for if the policy is evaluated, it's in a country, how does the methodology from the maturity model is used for the evaluation? Do you have any good experiences on that? How is it used for in this practice? The maturity model.
I'm sorry, what model are you thinking of?
Maturity model.
What are the different metrics for use in evaluation?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
It's like you know, every country and every institutions are not same, right? They have some of them are advanced, some of them not. So there's already this systematic approach for the maturity is. So how that this model is used for the evaluation, especially this sector.
Yes, there are a number of good references for how people are evaluating programs in terms of what metrics or indicators is another term people are using for evaluating programs. And earlier, well, Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific has, I believe, the references on their website you can go to, but also definitely, I know IEPEC has lists of references that you can track down. And usually it's under like library or something like that. And you could, I think, find that as well. So those, they are available. If you have a problem finding them, let me just contact me and I'll contact you after the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you for that questions and for that response, Dr. Edward Fine. We also have a hand raised from Sabine Sharik. Sabine Sharik, would you please unmute and ask Dr. Edward Fine right away, please?
Right, thank you. I am Sabine Sharik from Sri Lanka. Thank you for the presentation. So I would like to ask from the presenter 2 questions. First is to, if possible, can you share energy type need where you have evaluated an example for energy evaluation need, and what are the type of indicators you were using? And this is our first question. And second question, what type of policies that you have evaluated in terms of energy evaluation, and how did you do that? So these are the 2 questions from myself.
Well, I'll do the second question first, and then you may have to clarify what you mean in the first one. But we have evaluated energy programs in the residential, commercial, and industrial sector. We've done that in terms of what we call the building shell, insulation usually, but also windows, and inside lighting and appliances, air conditioners, heaters or heat pumps in certain cases, motors, and that's true in the commercial sector, the bigger ones, particularly what we call HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and lighting, of course, has been a big one over the years. I don't deal in transportation, but there's definitely more interest in evaluating transportation programs, especially on the newer kinds of transportation programs that are out there in terms of electric vehicles, natural gas vehicles, and so on. And the metrics or indicators used, you know, they vary from one of the types of programs to another. One, again, is, for example, in the residential sector, and if you're, I mean, this would take all day to go over all of them, but say lighting in the residential sector, we had a big program promoting compact fluorescent lamps. Now we're promoting LEDs. And so you want to look at, for example, changes in lighting wattage, lighting use, how people change the use of lighting, where it occurs inside and outside the home, what kinds of products are they buying? And then if, again, we fast forward to the market, if we go to a store that sells lighting products, how do the lighting products change over time? What percent are compact fluorescents then, now? What percent are LEDs, and so on? And that's important because, again, if you look from a market transformation perspective, if 95% of the lights in a store are LEDs, you probably don't need a lighting program. So that's how things fold in to that by looking at these metrics. Your first question, I didn't understand that there's one word, meet, M-E-A-T? What was the?
Need, evaluation needs.
Needs.
Yes.
And what was the question about evaluation needs?
No, yeah, in energy sector, what type of evaluation needs you were working?
Oh, well, the needs are, in the early days, expertise. We needed people who knew how to do evaluation. And over time, that's expanded. In the beginning, there were only a few people doing that. So that was sort of one capacity building, going back to what we were talking about earlier. Another need for evaluation, is there a budget? As I mentioned again earlier, most of the money that went to a program went to implementation. Now, over time, people, the stakeholders I mentioned earlier, wanted to know, well, did this program work or not? And then fast forward to today, are we reducing any carbon emissions? So we needed budgets for that. Now budgets have increased as program budgets have increased. It's still a small percent. And one of the needs we wanted is to increase that percent. So instead of 1% of a program budget, maybe we can make it 3% or 4%. And then you can do a lot more. So those were off, right now, the two needs. The expertise we've gotten, the budget can be improved. We have the methodologies, and then we have reference manuals and metrics. We don't need to really create anything. The new need is another one, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the smart meters, for example. We're collecting all this hourly data. How does that feed into evaluation? And fortunately, we have a lot of smart people out there now who've been working in coding and figuring out how that data can be used in evaluation.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Thank you, Shabin, for participating in the Q&A session, and thank you, Dr. Edward Vine. We have Mohammed asking if you can also share the link for the report that you talked about in your presentations. And I think there's no more questions. Perhaps just one from my end, more like a comment. I really love the when you talk about market transformation evaluation. I think this is new to me, and also the closing the loop. Do you have any guidelines or handbook available globally that you can also share with us
Yes,
after this presentation?
I'd be happy to do that. And what I just, yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Edward Vine. So colleagues, we will also share this recording straight after this, as soon as possible after this session. And we'll also, I believe you also have noted down Dr. Edward Vine's email address, contact details. Feel free to contact him directly, follow up with some of the queries and questions you have. An expert in the evaluation of energy program and policies. Thank you so much, Dr. Edward Vine, for a lovely presentation, informative indeed. I think that's it. We have covered all of our questions. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we move on to closing remarks, Dr. Edward Vine?
No, again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and all the others on the webinar. And I look forward to hearing from others. If you have questions, I'll try to answer them. Thank you again.
Okay, great. I think we have a hand raised from Eden Chimek Ulsisu.
Yeah. Yes.
We'll take his final question and
sure. Thank you very much, first of all, for the very informative and innovative session. I'm a founder and president of Mongolian Evaluation Association, and one of our members, Ms. Mentbayer, she asked you about some questions on some resources. The reason why she is here also for this session is she's working in the energy sector in Mongolia, and we have this learning session that's organized by our association. So I want to ask you, the organizer, and also Mr. Edwine, if we could if we could share your some of your slides with our members, some key intakes from this webinar, and share with our members and some broader audience. Just asking some permission. Great.
You
Thank
have my
very
permission,
much.
and well, I guess yes is the answer.
Great. Thank you very much.
thank you, everybody. So if you have any other questions, you can write an email. We'll close the Q&A session now. We'll move on to the closing remarks. Before that, I'd like to humbly request everyone, please stay online. We have some announcement after this in terms of what's coming up. And also we'll give you some of the social media contact details that you can also check for some key messages from these webinars. Yeah? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege for me to invite the co-leader of EvalYouth Asia and EvalYouth Sri Lanka and a core member of APC Hub, Dulmina Chamathkara, one of the amazing people that is behind these sessions to deliver the closing remarks for us. Thank you. The floor is yours, Dulmina.
Thank you, Sakio. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So we have reached to the end of the today's webinar on the evaluation of energy programs and policies, strengthening value of evaluation in the Pacific region. So as mentioned several times during the webinar, I too believe this is a very timely topic considering what's happening all around the world, the climate change, economic crisis, and other issues. So on behalf of SLEvA and APIA, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Edwine, our main speaker today. And it's a great pleasure to have your insight, expertise shared through the webinar. Thank you, Dr. Ed, for your informative speech. I'm pretty sure that our participants have gained a good picture on energy policies, importance of evaluating energy policies, and what's happening in Asia Pacific region as well as in other regions. And then Sakio, our moderator of the webinar, you did an excellent job here. Thank you so much, Sakio, for the great moderation and keeping the webinar live. And next, I would like to express our appreciation to Anita Sharma, who set the stage for the of the webinar, giving opening remarks. Thank you, Anita. And of course, a huge thank goes to excellent production team, Randika, Punya, Pramoda, Hasiti, Madhuka, and also Wasela for the guidance, keeping always. So indeed, without all of you, this webinar won't be a success. So you all did an amazing job. And finally, I would like to thank all the participants here. So you were with us, spending valuable time, actively engaging with the webinar, with your questions, comments. So thank you very much. We truly hope you all gain kind of knowledge on these energy policies and the importance and everything. So, and finally, I would like to ask all of you to keep in touch with SLEvA, APIA, and join our further webinars. And you can listen to our webinars, YouTube channel, all of webinars. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dulmina. Thank you very much for that amazing closing remarks. Next slide, Randika, please. We just have an announcement to make before we say goodbye, colleagues. Yeah? So there's a webinar coming up, the 37th episode of this series, strengthening evaluation, the value of evaluation in the Asia Pacific region, and the topic will be localizing M&E education in the Asia Pacific regions. We have amazing lineup of speakers there in the flyer, and you can register using that link. APL will email out the registration link and the flyer to everybody. And also, please do keep in touch on their social media platform, and also Sri Lanka Evaluation Association social media platform. Randika, please, can you move on to the next slide? So these are the contact details. Keep in touch with them for if you need some of these resources that were talked about in these sessions. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you so much for your participation in the Q&A sessions, and we hope to see you again next time. Please turn on your camera and wave, say goodbye. And in the Pacific, in Fiji, we call Nisa Mwadamanda. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.